What's up, everybody? Welcome back to The Vibe. Today we have Morgan Akins joining us. Her DJ name is Anzers. She's a DJ, producer. She is the event coordinator for Bass Girl. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
Yes. So we'll start with, where are you from?
I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan, so about a half hour away from here at the very edge, but 45 minutes for the central area.
Okay, right on. You have a extremely diverse background in music. What kind of influence has these different genres had on your music?
I think it's made me appreciate the finer points of a lot of music because EDM really is limitless in terms of what you can add to it, and as far as different world styles. I mean, people aren't putting country in there, but there are electric slide guitars in some songs.
Yeah.
And I think Snavs used a banjo in one of his in the intro of one of his tracks. And I was like, is that a banjo? The way it inspired me was just realizing that I can pick up on those finer points, and I think I can appreciate it a lot more than maybe your average listener of EDM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your journey through music is something that, isn't stereotypical of most DJs. You want to start from the beginning and kind of work your way to how you got here?
Yeah, I started choir in 6th grade, like a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Instead of just taking it as I don't want to be in band, I took it as I really want to be a singer.
Yeah.
That was, I love the Spice Girls, and I was totally I would love to be a Spice Girl still.
Yeah.
But I wanted to sing, and as soon as I got in choir, my choir teacher was like, you should take voice lessons because you have something, and if you keep going with this, you can be really good at this. Mm-hmm. So I started taking voice lessons, and I was singing opera, and I absolutely hated it. I was not a good opera singer. I struggled for so long. Honestly, 10 to 18, I was trying to sing opera, and I just wasn't good at it.
Who suggested you do that?
My choir teacher and my voice teacher, because it teaches you insane control over your voice.
Sure, yeah,
and
makes sense.
So it's I appreciate that I did it. I just didn't do it well enough to really want to take it seriously.
Yeah.
So halfway between then, I started getting into musical theater and doing what's referred to, at least then, as contemporary. So I liked that more because it was more modern, and when I would do singing competitions, they weren't super critical of all the things I did wrong, because if I messed up, I could just act my way through it.
Sure,
and
yeah.
Usually I did comedy songs, so they were just cracking up the entire time. And most of the scorecards were she's hilarious, and if I got something wrong, they're we barely noticed.
Nice.
So that's one thing is my husband was explaining to me that some people are just naturally born, their voices are just beautiful with themselves, and I have a lot of friends in musical theater who are I know that they were just born with a beautiful voice, and I was someone who had to work a lot more at it. Mm-hmm. And that led to me kind of being frustrated, because a lot of opera and classical music in general, you're kind of forced into you have to be perfect, this is the way the song is written, do not deviate. Mm-hmm. Even from a young age, my brother was listening to a lot of punk music, and as soon as I started kind of having what I like to refer to as a musical consciousness, where you are old enough to start being more aware of what you like and what you don't like, and wanting to explore and be more active in music selection. Mm-hmm. I started going through all of his old CDs and just listening to Choking Victim was one of them.
Never heard of what is that?
It's more ska based, and then
right
but not super, and it wasn't there quite yet.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater soundtrack.
And when you hit your life, no quarter is the demon. A million brain wants a band, will always hit it.
Yeah, a lot of those bands were on there, but the thing that I liked about punk music is because it really was a fuck it attitude. Yeah. A lot of these guys really weren't good at playing guitar, but they didn't care. Mm-hmm. It was about the fact that they loved doing it, mm-hmm. that they loved what they were singing and writing about. Mm-hmm. And I loved that aspect. I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be here, and I have to show up, and I have to love it.
Right.
If you've heard a punk song and it's just someone screaming in the microphone, yeah. You're just what the fuck is this? Because even metal is much more technical, in terms of their vocals and their guitar riffs and all of these different things. Mm-hmm. Whereas punk is just kind of let's fucking do this.
Yeah.
Let's just go.
Right.
And there's stories of punk bands who like nobody knew how to play an instrument before we started doing this, and I was like, yeah, that's the kind of attitude I like.
Right on.
But like they had something to say and they had something to represent, and that's the whole point. And so I really fell in love with that idea of just freedom through just enjoyment, not freedom, not having to be perfect and fit yourself in a box, because that's what the genre is, that's what the standard is. And I then started getting into more like alternative singer-songwriter stuff, so like bands like Bright Eyes and Connor Oberst's side projects, where it was a lot of storytelling, Laura Marling.
Breaking Benjamin?
No, not so much that.
Okay.
It was like a lot more like acoustic things.
Okay, sure.
And I was really into like the storytelling aspect and like the very real honesty that were behind these songs. And
Sure.
like even if these people weren't good at singing, it was like the emotion that they put into the songs that was like really profound to me.
Right.
Then that led into folk punk, which is a genre that's all acoustic instruments, but they're playing like punk songs. So that's the best way I can describe it. It's a really it's a really like surface look at it. But there's like the original Johnny Hobo that was in the freight trains. He had these songs about like what it's like to be, you know, a punk kid, and like honestly like a lot of the reason that these people turned to punk music was because like they were really pissed off at society.
Yeah.
Like there's so many things wrong in our society, and this was a way for like them to talk about it and to express it. Like so many of us are depressed.
Like Rage Against the Machine.
Like
type
Rage,
band,
that's like a really good example, and it's just a way to really express like all that like really angsty things that happen when you're a teenager and
Sure.
you just have no outlet for, and in punk music like nobody's pretending that things are okay. Like they're very honest and in your face, and I loved that. I was in a folk punk band called Circle Get Square, and my boyfriend was the guitarist, and we wrote a lot of songs together, and I loved singing that music because it was so freeing and so honest, and I could put so much more emotion behind it. I wasn't singing in like Italian or German or whatever this opera song was, and I wasn't in musical theater pretending to be a different character. I was myself, like who really believed what I was saying.
Did you write those lyrics for those tracks, or?
I didn't write all of them, but the ones that I did write, it was co-written.
Okay.
Because we were a duet, and then we also had a viola player, which is actually how I started becoming interested in playing violin, because she let me. I tried playing guitar for the longest time, and the way that you hold your fingers in guitar, like my fingers like did not work.
Yeah.
Like you have to keep them, and I can't do it.
Yeah.
But like as soon as I picked up a viola, like my fingers went into the exact right space, because when you hold it, your fingers like go this way, and there's a lot of people, especially guitar players, who pick it up and they're like, what, like how do I do this? And I also had a really hard time strumming. I just couldn't really get the motion correct, and I know if I practiced it would be okay, but I was just so frustrated that I couldn't get beyond that initial point. But as soon as I was like, she taught me how to bow, it was just so much more natural. Like I felt a huge connection to it. And I got into violin for real when I went to college, and they had one of my professors, he held old time jam night every Tuesday, like in the lobby of the dorm room that I was in.
That's badass.
And so like it's just all these musicians from all around Lansing who love, so old time music is like the original folk music of America. It's a mixture of European music, a lot of like Irish jigs and stuff like that, but it's also mixed with like technically West African rhythms, because folk or old time music came from slave culture. It was picked up by white musicians because obviously slaves were not allowed to perform, and they weren't allowed to record music when it started making it to that stage. I find it more interesting than Irish music, and there's someone who's going to be mad at me about that. But so there's like these canons, and you have everybody like knows these songs, and they'll call it a song, and then everyone's like, okay, here we go, and they like.
How many people usually sat in on these sessions?
We like the least amount were like, I think 9, but
Okay.
it would be like 10, 15.
Okay.
And we'd be in this big circle, violins, guitars, banjos. We had a washboard player at one point.
Wow.
So that was fun. And we had someone who played the spoons as well.
No, that is the definition of folk. Right
Yeah.
there, to me, at least.
Yeah. And so I kind of joined in, and like I knew how to play banjo like a little bit, or no, sorry, mandolin a little bit, but I wasn't I didn't really love it. So he actually set up fiddle lessons through some of the musicians in the group, so I could pay and they would let me run a violin, and then I learned how to play the fiddle. But the thing about old time music is you don't learn by sheet music, you learn everything by ear, because that's like the traditional way to learn music.
Yeah.
Because back when this music was being disseminated around communities, like there was no sheet music for it. And so based on your region, things would differ because of who you learned it from. So now when people play songs because it's been recorded, they'll say this is Britches Full of Stitches in the style of Bruce Molsky. And it will be Bruce Molsky's interpretation of that old time song.
Sure. Yeah.
Or Angeline the Baker in the style of Crooked Still, which is one of my favorite versions of that song. And it's basically like you have all these songs and everyone's just pulling from it and creating their own version of it, which really tied into EDM, because it's like there's this pool of music and you pull samples from it and like you reimagine it based on who you are, like your musical influence and like what you think you can do as an artist.
Sure. Yeah.
So I was playing fiddle for a while, and I was touring with one band, and we kind of had a falling out. Part of it was around the fact that they just like really didn't take it as seriously as I did, and I'm gonna be honest, I would nag them a lot of the time, like, hey guys, like, let's get it together.
Right.
I mean, the bass player was never on time. Most of the time didn't show up, which is not, I've heard is not uncommon for bass players in bands.
Yeah.
Sorry for anyone who's a bass player, but I'm going to call you out
Don't
on
be
that
that
one.
guy.
Don't be that guy. And, but like the other part of it was, it's honestly really hard to be a girl in an all-guy band. I don't think anyone does it intentionally, but like you are excluded. And I'm not saying that's true for all bands, but it is kind of lonely and it is frustrating sometimes. So when I left that band, because they just kind of parted ways, and I kind of left before that even happened, I started playing with another band called the Hangdog Hearts out of Indianapolis, and I would actually go there every weekend.
How did you get linked up with them?
So the original band I was in, called the Devil's Cut, we toured to 2 festivals, Farmington Music Festival in Montana, which was part of like this scene. And this isn't the folk punk scene, it's kind of like a new genre of that's more, it's actually doesn't really have a name, and
Okay.
I'll get to that later. It doesn't
Okay.
really have a name, and it's really defined by these festivals that bring them together. So we toured Farmington Music Festival, and I was experiencing like all of these artists and this different way of playing this kind of folk, but still like gritty country, and mixed with like metal and rock and like Irish music, and there was also jazz in there. It was like this huge fusion.
Yeah.
And most of these guys were like punk musicians, like ex-punk musicians, ex-metal musicians. Like there was a girl who played classical violin and then moved to jazz, and so it was like everyone's from these different backgrounds, and they just came to make this like crazy concoction. And I think my favorite band, they're no longer together, but there's a video on YouTube that a friend shot that's really cool and just like really highlights them. It was called Jake Orvis and the Broken Band, and every musician a part of that band is just phenomenal at not only playing their instrument, but like their ability to jam and vibe. And it's like they do jam a lot, and at one point in the video Jake was like, I hope we didn't get too hippie on you, because they just like jammed for like a good like 4 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's just the people part of that scene were so invested in it, because they realized that in order for that scene to exist, like they needed to be a part of it. They needed to show up at the festival, they needed to show up at shows, they needed to donate to the bands, they needed to buy their merch and their recordings, because if they didn't do that part, like it would be gone, and people relied on that to like bring light to their life.
Yeah.
And it really became a family, and I'm glad I experienced it. And through that, when I left the Devil's Cut, I joined Hangdog Hearts. And because I was like, hey, I heard, because originally he was a solo act, and I was like, hey, like, I heard you're putting a band together, like, are you looking for a fiddle player? And we ended up with 2 fiddle players, but so it wasn't so bad when I left. That was a really great experience too. I liked being in that band more because I didn't feel so excluded. I felt more like a family. But I wanted to move back home. I was done with school in Lansing at Michigan State. It was too much to have to leave every weekend to go either practice or go on a tour run.
Right.
And when I came back, I was like looking around. I was like, does anyone need a fiddle player? Like, and I was coming across like either people who just didn't need an extra band member, or like legitimately had rules about no girls in the band.
Really?
Which, I mean, sucks, but like I do get it, because there are circumstances where there's like jealousy, or there's relationships that where it just shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And it kind of ruins things. But I got really depressed, and I started dating a guy who wasn't a musician. The only time I've ever been in a relationship with a non-musician, and I honestly don't think I would ever be able to do it again after that experience.
Yeah.
And I didn't play music. I like listened to music and stuff, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't pick up my violin for like a year. I wasn't even singing like in the shower anymore.
Wow.
And it was just, I was really depressed. And then, when we broke up, I was just like, I invested all my time in that relationship because I really didn't have anything else. And when we broke up, I just felt like I just snapped in terms of what I thought my life was going to be like, or what I was trying to make my life like. And just like, I snapped and I went back to music. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit and tell you why I decided to get into EDM at that point when I snapped, because I didn't really know anything about the EDM scene. And actually the person who introduced it to me was a coworker that I worked with at Timber Ridge ski area in the winter when I was on my winter break. And we were talking about music, and I told him I was a musician. He goes, oh yeah, I'm a DJ. I'm like, okay, you're a DJ. Like, you're not a real musician. That was before I knew anything about it. And I honestly regret that, but I also think it's kind of funny that I just made that assumption.
Right.
But
Everybody
then,
does, you know?
yeah,
It's kind of the thing.
And then he like explained it to me, and what's even more hilarious is after that conversation with him, and I went back to school, this class that started after the break was about technology and creativity, specifically in music, and we opened the class with DJing. And it was so freaking weird, because there's so many people in that college that I was in who were like musicians, and like alternative musicians at that, and they're all like, yeah, like DJing is not a skill, like it's not a musical skill, like it's not hard, like you push play, that's it, right? And then I was like, oh, hold on guys, like let me shed some light on this situation. And when I had my moment of clarity and realized that I needed music in my life, I just like got online, bought a deck, like not even a used one. I spent like a lot of my paycheck, and it was just like, fuck it. Yeah. I called my friend Seth, who was the DJ that I met, who was making fun of at that time. And I was like, my deck's gonna be here on Tuesday. Can you come over? I will buy you all the beer you want and show me how to use this thing. And it did help that I had an understanding of musical theory, because I used Serato to begin with. I was on DDJ SR Pioneer, and he showed me how like basically the program lays out the waveforms similar to the way you read sheet music. So it's separated into 4 bars, or whatever time signature you're in. And he was like, and then the way that a lot of EDM music works is every 8 bars to 16 bars, depending on your BPM, there's a shift in the music. So he had me go through everything from like loading my tracks into this program to queuing them up. And then once I had that done, he came back and he showed me actually how to use the deck and like mix them together. And I just used kind of an understanding like of how beats like match up. And I was kind of thinking more along the lines of, you start in a jam session, like you start with like just the guitar, and then like maybe, or sorry, just the bass, and then maybe the guitar comes in, and then like all of these other instruments just add on to each other. And like, it's just that idea of creating something out of just one element and making it into something bigger. And it was a lot of experimentation, but it all happened in 1 week. After 1 week of me just DJing probably for a couple hours a day, and using the one EDM album I had, which was an all trap music volume 2, and then a handful of hip hop songs, and then a Lorde album. I was able to throw together a set, and I played at our open decks the next week.
Which was where? Where's the open decks?
So the open decks is hosted by the other guys, and I really appreciate that is there, because I don't think I would have gotten far in the music scene had that not been there. The idea behind the open decks is anybody can play. All you have to do is submit your name. Then if there's too many people, they'll draw at random. Mm-hmm. If there's not enough people, they'll make sure that anyone who's new is on the lineup. You may not get like a later spot because you're new, mm-hmm. and they just want to see, like, they want you to like break in, you know, that being in front of the audience aspect. But mm-hmm. like, you don't have to pre-submit or anything. They just you all you have to do is want to DJ.
Okay. Did you bring your own deck, or did they have it?
Yeah. So you have to bring your own deck. You have to have your own equipment. But they have all of the sound there. It's at Papa Pete's, which is like our local spot to hold shows. Sure, yeah. It gets you in front of an audience, and not only does it do that, it introduces you to the community, and it introduces you to other DJs. Mm-hmm. Because it's really my belief, looking back, that you can learn as much as you can on your own as a DJ, but like, if you do not spend time with other DJs and learning and working with them, like, you're not gonna easily come out of what you know in your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. I became a better DJ because I went and hung out with the other DJs I met at Papa Pete's, and I became a better DJ because I constantly was learning things from other people and talking with them and like discussing issues and problems and how they handle them. And that's part of what makes, I think, being a female artist hard, is because most DJs in a scene are male, and if you're not comfortable just hanging out with a room full of guys, which like not everybody is. But I grew up with like all boy cousins, and we were really close, mm-hmm. so it wasn't as intimidating to me. Mm-hmm. But yeah, if you're not comfortable with that, or if they're really excluding you, like, you don't have that same ability to learn that the way that they are. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anyone does it on purpose, but it is awkward going to a room full of guys when you don't know everyone, and you're kind of like, I was at a place where a guy was like hitting on me, and like, he would not leave me alone, and I probably should have just said something to the people I knew there, and mm-hmm. they would have asked him to leave, but mm-hmm. for some reason I just left instead. Yeah. And that sucked, but I am blessed that there's really great people in there who I was able to work with. Mm-hmm. And then the way I met my husband was we had on the open decks page, I was like, what are set times? I just commented, and he was like, who's this girl who's asking when she's DJing? At that point, I think I was like one of 2 girl DJs mm-hmm. in the Kalamazoo scene.
And what year was this? How long ago?
I can't even remember.
A while?
Yeah, 2018, end of 2017 or beginning of 2018. Yeah. No, that's wrong. 2000 and shit. I'm thinking of when we got our dog.
Okay.
It's end of 2016, beginning of 2017. Okay. He hit me up on Facebook, and I didn't know, because like, if you're not friends with someone, you know how it like filters out your messages. I didn't see his message for 3 months.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then when we finally met up and like we went on our first date, we actually went on our first date to Bass Elements.
Okay.
Because we were talking on a Tuesday, and he was like, you know, you should, like, I didn't know Bass Elements existed at that point. He's like, you should come with me to Grand Rapids, and we'll just go hang out and watch DJs all night. Mm-hmm. And so we bonded immediately over DJing and listening to music together. Mm-hmm. And that was our first like strongest like anchoring point in our relationship. Mm-hmm. But he had been DJing for 3-4 years more than me, mm-hmm. and so I learned a crap ton from him. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm so thankful that he was able to like show me the ways that you can manipulate the technology in order to create different versions of songs and stuff. Like, there's a lot you can do that is beyond just transitioning. Like, you can like rolling songs is where like you loop it so that let's say you have like a part of a song that's 4 beats and you want to just loop the 4 beats, depending on whatever equipment you're using. You loop that 4 beats so it starts like matching to another build, which and then when that build goes to 2 beats, you move that, you know, lyric to 2 beats, and then 1, and then half, and then a quarter, so that you basically create a build with the other song.
Interesting.
So you're not constantly just waiting for things to happen. Like you're actively creating things.
Okay.
And you're also doing like cutting out things and like bringing them back in. You're layering things so that they mesh well, and it's really just experimentation and knowing your library. And so he was explaining all this to me. Well, maybe not even explaining. I think most of it I probably just watched happen.
Right. Yeah.
And then I was adding like my own understanding of how music worked to the way that technology allowed me to use it or play on it. And it just kind of built up from there. I think the only time I was really offended about him was I had just got off stage and he had played before me in a lineup, and some random guy who we didn't know came up to him and it was like, "You taught her well," and he's like "I really didn't teach her anything." And I was like I just made this face. I was like it was kind of hurtful that like he didn't think that I brought anything to the table before that.
Yeah, come on.
But that wasn't like a huge deal. Like, assumptions are assumptions.
Right.
He probably won't make those assumptions anymore. But like, I am really appreciative of him and the experience that he was able to bring, but he learned from other people too, and he learned from doing, and when he started, he actually like didn't have anybody. And then I'm also really appreciative to the open decks, because like we've turned out so many DJs from just that I guess you could call it program.
Yeah.
It happens every Monday night. It's free to anyone who's 21 and up.
Was Peekaboo one who
I don't know if he actually ever played open decks, but I know he went there.
Okay.
Sully played open decks a lot.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like a lot.
He is coming up.
Yeah,
sure.
He's got some really awesome tracks out right now. I was actually watching one of his Twitch streams where he was breaking down one of the tracks, and I was just like, this is so awesome. Like, and I was actually taking screenshots. I was like, oh my god, this is so cool.
Yeah.
And so it really gives, it not only like fosters our local scene and gives people a chance to experience EDM music and fall in love, it builds up the DJs who are the ones delivering that music at that point.
Right.
And especially living in a college town, there's a lot of people who come to Western and like don't know it exists, just go on the off chance that it's fun and just fall in love with it. And that's kind of what happened to me. I knew about Papa Pete's from Seth, and then also my friend Christian, who I went to high school with and is actually in musicals with, dance partner.
Hey.
He goes by Juice Music, JVICE, and then music with a Z and a K.
Okay.
Because, you know, we're DJs, and
yep.
you gotta mix it up because there's too many copyrights.
Right, yep.
Or trademarks or whatever you want to call it. And I remember getting off the stage and like they both like group tugged me after my first set. And
Love it.
But I went there and I was like just, you know, having fun dancing, and it's just like such a really cool atmosphere. You know, people show up there and they're like, you know, I want to DJ. And that's what we need, because like as soon as another DJ like maybe like stops DJing for specific reasons or they move away, like we have new people coming in, because like that's how you keep a scene going. And that's like part of participatory music.
Right.
If you don't have people participating, it's going to die out. And headliners aren't going to come to the shows that you throw, because like there's nobody there to sell tickets to.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, it's $2 drinks, so like that's a big draw.
Yeah, oh yeah.
$2 you call it till midnight. Yeah. That's a big draw.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like where I ended, I guess. Not ended, but caught up to recent events. You know, I didn't really expect anything from DJing, but it gave me the ability to be a solo artist, but also have the opportunity to work with other people, which is like such great freedom, because I honestly, like, a violin cannot be a solo artist, like, and like sell tons of records, unless you're Lindsay Sterling. But
Exactly,
even then, she like works with other people.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be the leader of a band. I didn't want to be like the sole responsible person, and I just kind of wanted the ability to do things by myself, but then also have like a community to work with, and this was a perfect way to do that. And you have so much freedom because even as a producer, like, you're not limited by the amount of instruments you play. You're limited by the amount of I guess inspiration that you are cultivating from things around you. And as soon as like you open your ears and like you allow inspiration to come to you, like the doors are wide open.
Right. So I want to backtrack a little bit and talk about your time at college, because I think that's where you really, not to say that you didn't have an understanding of music before that, but you were able to dive even deeper. And you studied musicology. Ethnomusicology.
Yeah.
Go ahead and talk about that.
So I'll explain the difference between musicology and ethnomusicology. Musicology is like the study of Western canon of music, and you study like the societal structure of it. But ethnomusicology is a broader, like, worldly look at it. And the reason why I like that is because a lot of music in other worlds, like salsa bands and Haitian rah-rah bands, like, they do not make music to record the way we do in Western society. They make music to be a part of something, kind of like DJing. There's a lot of DJs who aren't producers, and like that's not why they're playing the music. They're playing music so that they can like let people dance and have fun, and that's the reason why salsa bands play. They're providing the dancing music, and it's different than the presentational music where like a rock band will practice their set and it will be the way it is and everything is planned out. Maybe they'll jam a little bit, but it's very it's more regimented. But then you have this participatory aspect that I learned in ethnomusicology that really fosters a way more interesting communal dynamic that is just so it let me go into like a punk scene. And even though punk bands like will plan out their sets and stuff like that, there is a lot more spontaneity, so it's kind of meshes a little bit because they do want to have the goal of making people dance and making people participate and like and so when I studied ethnomusicology, my first project was examining the punk scene in Lansing, and then I moved on to that class that was about DJing, and in that class I learned to look at music. It wasn't about DJing, but it was about technology and its relationship to music. As part of not only the way it's like played and processed, but like how we view it as a society. So we opened that class with the idea of like music recordings. So when music first began, it was all done by ear. Like it was passed down through like oral tradition, basically. And then once it was written down and you could buy sheet music like from a catalog to like play in your home after dinner. It was there was like more ownership over the music, but like you didn't own the performance. It was in the moment, still like a very communal aspect. And then as soon as it started being broadcast over radio, it was a little more like, I think people stepped back from playing music themselves. At least that's what I gathered from the research, and they just started letting the musicians play. Whereas before it was like, if you know how to play the piano, give it a shot. Like, we just want to hear some music. And then as soon as the wax cylinder came out and you could actually record music, it like totally changed. Because before, like, you could own the sheet music companies like owned the written form of songs that people created, but they didn't own the performance yet. So you have this ability to capture the performance and like in people's minds, like that today, that is music. Like that idea of like you can put it into your Bluetooth and listen to it anytime, like that is music. Which is kind of weird because that's a man-made structure of music. Music actually exists in real time in terms of like playing it, but then you go to DJing and it's not really the same thing because you are no longer under the constraints of what your instrument can do, what instruments you have at your disposal, what instruments you can play, what band members you have. You have a computer that has an unlimited amount of instruments. On top of that, you can record a live instrument, and then you have this software that can turn any sound into something crazy different from its original. So basically, like, you're creating things that don't exist in real life,
Right.
which is kind of a crazy concept, because before, you know, audio engineering software came out where you could do that, you could only progress music as far as people could progress different ways to play an instrument.
Right. Yep.
But the fact that, like, we make sounds that don't exist in real life also dictates that we have to play it differently. So I see producing as songwriting. It takes a long time. Like, nobody wants to not usually nobody wants to go to a concert and watch someone listen to the same loop over and over again while they try different samples,
Right.
like to add to and layer and stuff like that would be extremely boring. I mean, I hear it from my husband, and sometimes I'm like, oh my god, I just need to put headphones on. I've heard that loop for, I swear to god, 5 minutes, but like, that's just the way it goes. And I do this, like, I do the same thing, so I can't be mad about it. But when you perform on, like, a deck, that's actually playing the instrument.
Right.
Like, your deck is your instrument.
Right. Yep.
But because, like, you create these sounds that don't exist in real life, you have to play the recorded formats. But where DJing becomes a participatory act is you're not playing the song as it is usually performed. You're not just letting it play out.
Right.
You're constantly creating something new from the pre-recorded formats. So I almost kind of think of it as, like, DJs are the composers of, like, a symphony.
Right.
They can add any instruments they like, and they have the song, but they react, like, good composers will react to, in the moment, to the way that the artists are playing. Unfortunately, the audience doesn't have a lot of say at that time. They're just kind of listening quietly.
Right.
But being a DJ is, like, you are in the moment, reacting to, like, the energy of the room. And at least that's how I view really good DJs. And you're taking these elements that exist in, like, this musical, I call it, like, a well. Like, it's like, or like a pond or something. And, like, all the DJs, like, have their buckets, and they come up with the things that they like, and then they basically craft different ways of looking at this music that's been created by all these different artists.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, DJs will hear, like, an artist play their other song, and the way that they play it and what they mix with it before and after, like, they just get so excited because they're like, that was insane, that was so awesome.
Yep.
Or they'll make a remix of it and production, and that they're excited about it. Nobody's like, oh my god, you stole my track.
Right.
Or you ruined my track.
Right. Yeah.
It's like they're just excited that someone's working with it in general,
Yeah.
which where it circles back to, like, the beginning of music, where nobody, I mean, you can't use a track by a DJ without paying royalties, but at the same time, like, as a DJ, it's understood that pretty much all music is fair game to play at a show, because that's just the culture.
Right.
So it kind of circles back to the beginning, where it's participatory and you're drawing from the community in order to create something in the moment.
Right.
Versus, like, this is my creative sphere and I do not go outside these bounds. This is the show that we rehearsed, and you're not going to get anything different.
Yeah.
When I first started DJing, I would create sets, like, I would practice them and I would make sure that they were perfect before I performed them. Now when I DJ, at least I know the first song I'm gonna play.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go up there and I don't even know the first song I'm gonna play until, like, I read the energy of the crowd and I get a song in my head and I'm like, that's perfect. And I start going and I get in this flow state, which, do you know what a flow state is?
Go ahead and explain it.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah. There you go.
So a flow state is the idea that you're doing something that's just challenging enough that it keeps your interest, but you're still so used to it that you can do it almost without thinking. So a lot of athletes do this, especially, like, skiers. They know exactly what they're doing, but they're still engaged because it's still challenging to them.
Yeah.
And it's just this, like, it's kind of an out-of-body experience for some.
Sure.
For some, it's like, for me personally, it's kind of like I black out and I actually don't know what's going on. I'm just so in the moment, and I remember things and I have flashes when I get off the stage.
Yeah.
But I'm just, like, everything just kind of blends together, and I'm just feeling rather than thinking.
Right.
And being in a flow state is the best way that I can perform, because I'm reacting to the audience energy and I'm reacting to this reception of the music. and then also like how I feel about what I played. And also when I'm in a flow state, if I mess up, I'm like, whatever, and then I just keep going.
Yeah.
So basically when I DJ like that and I don't have a plan, I sometimes it's not like this, it's not as great as it could be, but honestly, it's always been more fitting than if I've ever planned a set. When I played my wedding show, I planned a set, and then I think I just picked songs from the playlist that I made and then added things to it because it didn't fit the moment.
Yeah, right. No, I think that's a huge part of DJing is looking at it as a performance as well, right? Like, I think sometimes you get stuck into, I have to play this song, or I have to make sure this plays after this, but sometimes when you get into that flow, like you were saying, there can be some, I don't know what you want to call it, but like happy accidents where you're just like, that fucking
definitely.
killed, right? Yeah.
Like sometimes I come off stage and someone's like, where'd you get that mashup? And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I can't even remember the mashup. It was No Diggity and then like another like kind of trappier song. And someone's like, you gotta give me that mashup. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, the No Diggity mashup. And I was like, that was live. Like I didn't really think about it. It just happened to work.
Yeah.
And sometimes you mess up, but like honestly, the average audience member doesn't really care.
Right.
Like the other DJs in the bar are like, ooh, they're like, ugh. But like they don't really care either because everybody messes up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you're doing it live most of the time, and sometimes playing violin was easier because everything was muscle memory.
Yeah.
Whereas like DJing, I have to constantly be thinking. And it's sometimes really hard to dance because I'm always doing something.
Yeah.
So it may not be as entertaining as some DJs because I'm like, I'm doing shit.
Right, yeah. Kind of bouncing off what you were talking about in terms of what you're playing as far as when you DJ. I think a lot of, and I kind of remember Pretty Lights being one who didn't like being called a DJ, more so like being called a producer because he was actually doing all his own original content, and all his sets were pretty much 100% original. So I totally respect that aspect, and I think DJing, anybody can be a DJ, right?
Yeah.
But it takes a lot more to become a producer.
Yeah.
And knowing how the ins and outs
and that's actually what I tell people because they're like, oh, I think I want to get into DJ, and I say to them like, honestly, it's not hard. Like you can be a DJ, being a good DJ and being like good at DJing and really surprising people and wowing people is different. But being a producer, like that's the difference between someone being a guitar player and then being a songwriter. They can play like any cover, but like creating an original is much more intricate and requires a lot of different discipline. And that's why I respect like my one of the bass girls, Allium, she played an all original set at the show that we had her at, and my friend Introspace also played an all original set, which was like such an amazing, and I was just like every time I was like, oh my god, I was like, I just couldn't believe it because like I've heard all his songs, but then to string them all together like that in a completely original set, like it just blows you away. But it's it is different sometimes because when you do play an original set and for Pretty Lights, like they're there to see Pretty Lights, so they want his content. But sometimes like if you're an opener DJ, like people aren't really there for you.
Right, exactly.
And so it can be like, they don't want to hear an all original set. And I know that there are DJs that are like, fuck it, I'm gonna play whatever I want to play. But my view on that is like it's a participatory genre, and so I want to be able to connect with people. My main goal in music is to be able to connect with people, whether that's through creating my own tracks or playing other people's tracks. Like I'm still connecting with people, and that's my main goal, and as long as I'm doing that, I think I'm doing well.
Right, yeah, for sure. And I think the fan base too, it doesn't really matter if they hear the same sample or the same track, because there is such an ability to change it in a way to where it might sound the same if you just single it out, but when you add these other layers that you're able to do while you DJ, it's completely different, and I think that's what makes this scene in particular so just, possibilities are so endless that it's going to be really hard to hear the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, because everybody's mind works differently. Right. So like my friend Introspace, like him and I actually end up playing a lot of the same tracks, like because we have similar tastes in terms of what we like to play out when we DJ, but we play them completely differently. But one of my favorite things when I DJ is actually when an audience member like will come to the stage and just like point at you. They're like, yes, like, because the track you're playing right now is like one of their favorites. Or they'll talk to you after, like, I never hear anyone play that track. Yeah. And like they like that makes them invest in you and wanting to come back to see you, or just coming back to the scene in general, which as long as they're being supportive, not just of you but of everyone there.
Yeah. I think this scene has evolved immensely since I first got into it, which was about 9 years ago. And I think you're starting to see a lot more artists add the live instrumentation part. Pretty Lights has done it. Odessa has done it. I think that kind of is going to be the
Sullivan
next...
King.
Yeah, and that's going to be the next shift, I think, just because it adds this extra element, right? Like, it's all about adding these different elements to really help you feel the vibe that this performer is giving. And vocals is actually one that...
popping up more and more.
Yes, for me has been like huge. So we went and saw Big Wild in November, and never realized how amazing his voice was, and he has a lot of great backup singers as well. But man, there was a song that just I was belting out at the top of my lungs, right, and it just took me to this euphoric out of body experience, like you mentioned earlier. And I think that's really what it is adding all those layers together to really just have you so immersed in the vibrations that you're processing, right? To just, I don't know, it's indescribable.
Yeah.
It's so hard to describe moments like that, but that's why we love live music, and that's why we keep.
And there's a lot of genres that do that, but EDM does it on another level because it has to, in a way. Because when a DJ is DJing, let's take out the aspect of them playing live instruments. When a DJ is DJing, like, they're behind decks and they're not Beyonce dancing.
Right.
So you kind of take that entertainment element out a little bit, so then you add visuals and you add the lights, and you're creating an entirely sensory experience.
Yep.
Maybe like taste like alcohol or whatever, but
right.
but like it's more sensory because it's just totally engaging you, and it's creating this atmosphere that like you almost can't not be in unless you like exit the area where all the lights are hitting you and the sound is like perfect in your ears. Right. And it reminds me of like when you were in a car with your friends and you turned up the music so loud that it's like surround sound, and you were just like screaming at the top of your lungs, and it was like so moving. And that's basically what's happening when you're going to an EDM show. You're hearing your favorite tracks and like new tracks, and you're there with your friends, and you can like look them in the eyes. You don't have to look at the stage the entire time the way you might for like a classical music concert. Right. Yeah. And it becomes such a communal experience, and I feel like those shows remind me of the punk shows because they're more memorable. Like you're up against people, like you're dancing with them, and it engages you more. And when you're engaged in an experience, like it's more memorable and it's more impactful. The first song that ever really got me into EDM was the remix of Crave. Adventure Club, but Flight Facilities, remix. Yep. And or Crave You, and then I specifically like remember turning it all the way up in my car, and the layers and like the rhythmic aspect that was being used, like I honestly was so impacted. Like I was like hard time catching my breath. It was like so heavy, and I was feeling these emotions, and I was like, holy fucking shit. Yeah. It was such a like sensory experiencing kind. It was otherworldly because a lot of these instruments again don't exist in real life. Right. So it's almost like a spiritual aspect. Absolutely. That I really appreciate.
Yeah. And I mean, you can correlate it to religion where, you know, they sing songs and you can have that sort of experience, but then you add all these extra layers that EDM does, and it's just like, whoa. Yeah. So we'll talk about your DJ name here for a second. Anzers. Unique name. You look at some of these lineups with these DJ names, and some of them are humorous, and there's always a story behind it. What's the story behind yours?
So when I was really into punk music and I was tagging things, like I don't recommend destroying public property, by the way. Yeah. But I would like either write quotes that I came up with or other really profound things, and my tag name was Anzers. And my boyfriend at the time, he went by No One, like KNO, like the number one. Yep. And when I was coming up with a tag name, I was evaluating the state I was in, and I was diagnosed with depression, officially diagnosed with depression since the age of 10. And at that time I was 15, 16, and I was still living with chronic depression, and there was constantly this dialogue in my mind, like, why me? Like, why this? Why does the world have to be this way? So I just kind of decided, like, my entire life, I'm just, like, constantly looking for answers in whatever I can find around me. And usually that was art, to be able to understand, like, not only my experience better, but, like, the human experience.
Sure.
I mean, there's people who go through life who don't really, like, contemplate those things and maybe don't have existential crises, but I was definitely someone who really likes looking deeper into things. Like for instance, like, why do we have art? Like, we discussed, like, if art wasn't important, it would have died so long ago. Why does someone love playing the violin? Like, you know, constantly searching for answers, like, is what kind of drives you in life.
Sure.
And even if, like, you don't get them, even if they're a mystery, it's what keeps you connected. Like, the more you know and the more you share with people, the more experience you get out of life.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. That's why we do this podcast, right, Dan? That's a great story behind that name. Some stories are just like,
yeah,
it's just
well,
kinda weird, but-
because I used it as a tag name, and then I used it as, like, a visual artist name. My friend Seth, who went by Dolly, he was like, well, what are you going to call yourself, like, when you go to open? And I was like, fuck, I don't know. But then I was looking at some of my screen prints that I did in college, and I was like, Anzers. I was like, and then I looked it up on Google, obviously, just to make sure nobody had it.
Right.
And yeah, SoundCloud, I have the link now, the SoundCloud URL. And sometimes people butcher the name, which is totally okay, because there's not a W in it, and it throws people off. Which is, the W is silent, so I don't really know why it throws people off. It's basically useless.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just it. It really described me as, like, why I play music, is because I look for the answers in life, and like, I feel like music and art really maybe don't provide the entirety of the why, but they provide enough that keeps me engaged and here and wanting to experience it.
Yeah, for sure. We'll go back and touched on you had some mental health issues growing up. How did you first, or who learned that there was something wrong, and then how did you go about correcting that over the years?
So I was diagnosed with a learning disability when I was 8 years old, because the teacher that I had actually had a daughter with a learning disability. And some learning disabilities or cognitive disabilities are not noticeable unless you're in, like, a teacher relationship and you're noticing that this child is, like, struggling, and there's not really a legitimate reason why, because the way they speak and, like, everything that they seem to understand is kind of on par with the other kids, but they just are doing it at a slower rate. And they put me in for testing, and I was diagnosed with a cognitive disability. And the reason why it's called a disability is because since everyone's brain works differently, there's not really a name for every single disability. I started going to tutoring and all this, but what happened, and I didn't figure out this until I was in college, and they let me read, like, the initial report that they took when I was being screened. They noticed some other qualities about me, and they notated that, like, I might develop depression, anxiety, or something along those lines as an older child, because it was just kind of a pattern. Just the way I spoke and the way I talked about my relationships with people and how I viewed myself. When I was 8, I was already kind of not like actually clinically depressed. According to my mom, expressing things about, I guess, like, not really self-hatred, but, like, a self-deprecation in a way, which is, I can't even imagine, like, the way my mom and dad felt about that.
Yeah.
But then when I hit, puberty and hormones kicked in, like, I immediately just hit a wall. I started taking depression meds, and I was 10, 11, all the way to 20. Wow. I was still, like, dealing with depression, and it just, like, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't getting any better. And I was just being told, like, like, hang in there, we're gonna try to figure this out. There was a lot of adjusting of meds, like going to therapy, like getting tools on how to handle things. And finally, by the time I hit 20, and just there was no improvement, they diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. And usually it takes a long time to diagnose with someone with that, because, like, they don't ever really want to do that. Bipolar disorder and similar mood disorders, they really can't be treated without medication. It's a genetic thing, whereas things like depression and anxiety, everyone has the potential to experience that just based on circumstances. Chronic depression and anxiety can be linked more to your brain chemistry, but bipolar disorder is, like, entirely the way just your brain works. You have to take medication every day. If I don't take medication, not only do I notice it, my husband, he doesn't always say, like, did you take your medication today?
That's not like a trigger.
Yeah, it's like, well, because sometimes I get angry about it, but it's a
Yeah.
legitimate question, because
Yeah,
if I'm starting to like break down over the fact that like just something that would seem frivolous to me on another day, then he's like, okay, how are you feeling right now? Like, let's think back. Like, have you eaten? Like, you know, what happened today? Did you take your medication? And like, it's I don't like being in a state where don't feel like myself. And when I started being treated for bipolar disorder, I did start feeling like myself. The thing about bipolar disorder is when you take depression meds, it actually can make it worse, because it kind of like numbs you, but still keeps you in a depressive state.
Oh wow.
So it wasn't anyone's fault, because like, you know, I'm not blaming anyone, but I did feel like a zombie most of my life, at least in, you know, high school, and which is why one of the reasons I gravitated towards punk music, because I was so angry about just like my mental state that I could just take it out in this music, and it just felt so freeing.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, things made way more sense, and I started feeling like myself, and I was able to experience emotions on a different level. And that's one thing about bipolar disorder, because like at least I have type 2, which is tends to lead more towards the depressive state rather than manic. So manic is when you're like super up and like you have an inflated sense of ego. There's a lot of people who make really bad decisions. Like you'll spend money like crazy, and I'm speaking in general terms.
Yeah.
One of the things for me is like I didn't sleep, I rarely ate, because you just didn't have those needs, because you're on like such an adrenaline high. And then depressive is like the polar opposite. You're just like, at the worst it gets is suicidal thinking. You sleep, you're depressed, you hate yourself, it's hard to get out of bed, you just kind of contemplate like, why am I even doing this anymore? And someone who's bipolar 1 will bounce back and forth like a lot. Usually someone who's bipolar 2 will experience hypomania, which is not as like high as type 1 mania, but when they experience the depressive, it's way lower than even like a lot of chronic depression, and it lasts longer. So hypomania and the depression can last longer than bipolar 1. And I went through, I think, 3 hypomania episodes, 1 when I was still taking depression medicines, 2 in college. I actually developed hypoglycemia, which is basically pre-diabetic low blood sugar, because I wasn't eating. And when I did eat, I ate like Cliff Bars and gummy vitamins, so it wasn't a balanced meal. And now if I go too long without food, I can faint, I can throw up.
Oh jeez.
I can like start shaking and like visibly sweating because I feel awful, which sucks, because like if I'm at Forest, I have to pay like a shit ton of money to get a piece of pizza, because like you can't bring trail mix in there.
Right.
Like I'm honestly thinking about getting like a diabetic bracelet, because like it sucks if I can't get my hands on something like with protein or something in it. The thing is like even if you have like glucose tablets, you still have to eat right away. I only luckily fainted 2 times. One, I fell into like a pile of blankets, so that was good, but it scared the crap out of my husband, and he was like really frustrated with me, because I tend to let some projects like take over my focus, and then I forget to do simple things like eat. And that's not uncommon for people, but like because of, you know, spending 6 months not sleeping and rarely eating, and when I did eat, I was eating like crap. I developed this side effect, and it's not uncommon for, you know, bad things to come out of hypomania or manic episodes. There's a lot of bipolar people who struggle with drug addiction and other, you know, things that happened when you were not making the best decisions. But at least I understand now how much my wellness is worth. And part of being, I call me and like other people who deal with mental illness like mental health warriors. And like part of being a mental health warrior is that you get to protect other people who may not have mental illness, but like everybody needs mental wellness, and everybody deserves that. So, you know, being able to disseminate the information that you've learned from therapy, I think is incredibly valuable, because you can not only lead by example and let them know that like it's okay to like do things like meditation, or, you know, if you need to talk to a therapist, that's totally fine. I honestly feel like everyone should talk to a therapist at least once a year.
Agreed.
Because it's like checking in.
Right.
It's like, you're like, okay, here's the things I dealt with, and then the therapist can give you tools. And also it's their job to listen, so anything you unload on them is not a concern to them. Whereas like a family member, a lot of people don't share things with them because it is a huge it is a huge load on their shoulders.
Right. I think therapists have this stigmatism as if you go there, you're crazy, right?
Yeah.
And no one wants to think that they're crazy,
Yeah.
right? But like, especially right now with everything that's going on, like, if you don't have someone to talk to, that's their job, you know, like, and getting your thoughts out into the world is so beneficial, and as I'm sure you know, for your overall well-being, you know, like you need to divulge those thoughts and kind of get outside your own head, because it's good for you, it's healthy, you know.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, it could just lead you down a path that's
destructive.
Right, exactly. And it's not you.
Yeah, and the thing is like when you go to a therapist, most of the time they will never. If a therapist tells you they're crazy, get out of there.
Yeah.
You tells you you're crazy, get out of there, because a therapist does not view you crazy. Like based on the way your brain works, what you've been through, and what's currently happening in your life, the way that you're feeling is totally valid. Because it's the way you feel. That's a reality. That's one thing I learned about therapy. I should never be ashamed of the way I feel, because it's just something that happens. If I want to change the way I feel and not like take it out on other people, that's a personal choice.
Right.
And not everyone has the tools or the knowledge to be able to do that. I really value therapy because it's taught me the things that nobody prepares you for in life. Nobody really prepares you how to deal with every single conflict that you're going to come across. You can get ideas, but honestly, like, your parents are not trained psychologists most of the time. I'm sure that some parents are. I'm interested to see how that dynamic is, if like the kids actually listen to them. But that's things that therapists can give you tools for. They can give you the tools to live a better life. So why would you not want to participate in that?
Right.
A lot of insurance nowadays covers therapy. There's online therapy programs that is much cheaper than in person. Part of being bipolar is like you have to go to therapy, because if they're not checking in with you and adjusting your meds, you can enter into a manic state and suddenly think that you're fine. I mean, one of the downfalls about being bipolar is sometimes if I'm like really, really happy, I kind of like worry like, oh my god, am I getting there?
Yeah.
Like, I gotta watch myself.
Right.
I did Dbt Therapy, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a more intensive type of therapy where I went 2 days a week for an hour and a half, one day one-on-one, another day either with a group or with one other person, and they made you track everything in your life. So they gave you a sheet. You had to track your sleep, your eating habits, your mood, your medication intake, and your exercise, because you needed to figure out ways to make your life better. And if you're not actively paying attention to it and you're ignoring things, like, how are you supposed to know?
Right.
And I went to that because before that I felt like I was literally treading water and I couldn't do it anymore. Like, I was just so tired, and I was like, there has to be a way out of this. Like, it just doesn't make sense that there's not. So my therapist, who I saw on a regular basis, she's like, I'm gonna get you into Dbt therapy. Here's a number. Here's like different people that you can contact. So it was actually the first person I contacted, took me on as a patient, and I am forever grateful for that. I now have the tools to be able to handle issues in my life that I never really could, that I would just like totally lose my shit over, not necessarily like get mad at people, but like tear myself apart over them. I've developed practices that keep me basically performing the way I want to perform, not just in music, but like daily life. I'm no longer at the mercy of my emotions, which is like something that a lot of people who have struggled with mental illness tend to suffer from, is their own emotions, and they have no idea what to do about them. And again, nobody like says like, here's a handbook like on how to deal with them. And yeah, you can read about it, but there is something about therapy and discussing your specific problems that makes it more personal to you.
Yeah, for sure. And hearing someone else's voice, then
reassuring that you're not crazy.
Right.
Like, here's what we can do to make you feel better.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think in EDM, you know, we've seen it with Avicii, how just
things get out of hand.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. But there are avenues to take, and it sometimes it needs to be a friend or a family member to be like, hey, you know, what's going on, or I think you should
get help.
Get help,
Yeah.
right? And that's up to us to be able to read those signs and to act. You know, the worst thing you can do is not say something.
Yeah.
You know, for sure.
And but it's also not. It's technically not other people's job to force you to go. Like, if you want to feel better about your life, like, you have to do the work. I was in therapy with people who, they were there, they showed up, but every time they were given a suggestion on how to improve their life, they're like, well, I can't do that because of this, and this. yeah, it's hard, but like I was there because I didn't want to suffer anymore. Like nobody in life should have to suffer. And so if someone's presenting you with ways that you could end that suffering, I don't care what it takes. Like I won't kill anybody for it, but like I don't care. Like I have to work out 30 minutes 3 times a week, which is for some people no. I have to eat healthy. I have to meditate every day. But these are things that keep me well, and I value my wellness because I love experiencing things in life. I love being with family. I love like being able to enjoy things. Like before that, I was just like lost, and I felt like things were just not. It was almost like I just didn't think things were worth it anymore. And the whole like slogan of Dbt Therapy is creating a life worth living. So you have to take those steps in order to make your life worth living, and your life is valuable. And even if people need to encourage you, that's fine, but like you have to take that initial step. You have to do the work if you want to get somewhere where you do feel better. And I have friends who still struggle with therapy, and they'll say things like, you know, I just like hate this and this, and you know, I don't want to do this and this. And I was like, well, if a family member was let's say like there was someone who's talking to your family member or a friend the way that you're talking to yourself, like how pissed would you be? Or let's say someone was mistreating someone else the way that you're mistreating yourself, how pissed would you be? You know, you're not any less than anyone else. And a lot of people who have mental health issues tend to devalue themselves because they see how much them just struggling takes a toll on other people. I am someone who grew up with parents who like just didn't know what to do because they didn't know what was wrong. And it took a toll on them. I saw it, and there was a lot of self-hatred because of it because I didn't know how to fix it. But I understand that it's like it wasn't my fault, and they also know it wasn't my fault. And I think a lot of it is like I would never let a friend be devalued the way I have devalued myself in the past. So I don't deserve to do that to myself either.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go back and talk about meditation, because I think that's becoming a lot more prominent, especially in the EDM scene. I myself have been dabbling in it a little bit, and just go ahead and talk about your experience with it.
So I never meditated before Dbt Therapy because I was like, it's just so hard to sit there and think about nothing. So in Dbt Therapy, they present you with this alternative. It's not really alternative because it is still meditation, but it's called mindfulness, where in order to get into like a Zen meditative state, you focus on one activity, whether it's breathing, focusing on your body weight on your seat, doing something like washing the dishes or walking, super simple things, but you use all of your senses to focus on that one activity, so you're not having those anxious thoughts and those things that are tiring you out and those things that are driving you crazy. That becomes your meditation. And I honestly can't meditate where my mind's completely blank for more than like 2 minutes without falling asleep. I'm gonna be honest about that one. But if I'm doing mindfulness, I can imagine like breathing and having the breath like move through my entire body and like filling up my body, and then when I let it go, my muscles relax. Because there's times throughout the day where I'm like, I realize I'm like this. And that literally tires out your body. It's tiring out your mind, it's tiring out your body, and it's wearing down your body. Like I get sick when I get super anxious. I've gotten strep throat and bronchitis from overworking myself and being super stressed out. And that's not uncommon for people to get illnesses because of stress. There's people who have heart attacks and die because of stress and that they didn't attend to it. So I'll do a mindfulness meditation every day, and sometimes it's as little as a minute of just breathing, like consciously breathing and focusing on nothing but breathing.
Do you use like an app or?
Yeah, so I use, it's called Stop, Breathe, Think, but it might be, I think it might have changed to my life. They have a free version. I pay for the subscription because I use it so much. And the reason why I like the guided ones, there's also a lot on YouTube that's free. The reason why I like the guided ones is because I don't have to expend as much energy trying to do it myself. But if I need to, I've memorized enough of those meditations to be able to do it myself. So I started meditating just for my general well-being and everyday life. And then about a year ago, after having a long struggle with like not performing as well as a DJ as I wanted to, I thought like, you know, like why don't I just meditate before I go on stage? Like let's just try it. So I brought my headphones with me, my Bluetooth headphones, and I think I went into my car, I just went outside, and I did this 10-minute meditation on the app that's called Relax, Ground, and Clear at a Performance. And it's meant to get rid of like jitters and anxiety about performing, which is, even though I've performed my whole life, I still get jitters and anxiety. And part of that is just because I really care about performing and I want to do well. Yeah. So it's normal. But I remember getting out of that meditation and just like opening my eyes and just like laser focus. And I was just so in the moment. I just felt so freaking confident. Yeah. And ever since I've started meditating for 10 minutes before my sets, sometimes it's less because I like don't have time to listen to the app, but again, I've memorized it, so it's really quick. I have never had a performance that I didn't enjoy. If I messed up, I still enjoyed it, but ever since I've started doing that, I've had people come up to me like, that's your best performance, and every single time like, no, that's your best performance. Yeah. And I honestly encourage other artists to do it because it gets you in the moment and it gets you ready to just be yourself and do your best versus thinking like, well, what do these people think, or like, does this sound okay, or oh my god, I just messed that up. And then it gets you out of that pattern of negative thinking and allows you to just get in that flow state.
Right. Yeah. For me, it's been hard because I read somewhere that said you are not your thoughts, which really thinking about that made me like, okay, yeah, sometimes my brain just keeps going and going. I'll get into these tangents and it's like, whoa, like just stop, like calm down, like I don't even know where some of these thoughts come from, right? Like, and so to hear that and be like, okay, maybe I am not my thoughts, like if when I do meditate and I'm able to calm down, you just feel at peace, right? Like you just feel like you're not distracted, or your mind is just focused, like you said, and you're able to just do you, right? And I can see how that would benefit someone like that, for like a DJ, because I'm sure there are tons of thoughts going through your mind before a set, and worrying, oh god, like are people gonna be in the crowd, and like all this, and just, no, focus on what you're there to do, right? So I can definitely see why that would be beneficial.
And it also lets you react to the external stimuli as well. So sometimes before I started meditating, I would be so focused on trying to play a perfect set that I wouldn't react to the audience. That's not what I want to do, but like because I'm reacting to this external stimuli and someone in the audience is giving me feedback about the way the set's going, I'm like, okay, they like that. Okay, like what else can I throw at them that might like totally like change the game for them or something like that. Yeah. And then, but it also just brings me back to this idea, like, so I was reading this comment that someone made about Vincent van Gogh and how people just assume that a lot of people tend to assume that he was a great artist because he had a lot of mental health issues and that he saw the world a different way. But to be honest, like he created some of his best pieces when he was in an asylum, when he was in recovery, because he wasn't like eating paint and trying to get high off of it and trying to basically self-medicate at that point because he just was he was suffering so much. Yeah. He created his best work when he was his best self. Yeah. So if you're not taking care of yourself, like you are not performing at your top level. And as an artist, like I don't know what artist doesn't want to be their best self.
Right. Yeah, and you see it a lot with some artists having to cut their tours short because their mental state, and I'm sure there are tons of factors that lead into it, whether it be drugs or just the late nights and always on the road. But I think that,
or not having a routine, that's a huge issue. Right,
exactly. Like you said, mental health, no matter what you're looking at, whether it be EDM or just people in their everyday lives, is so important. And listen to your body, right? Like it will tell you things, and it's just up to us to listen, and learn how to make your life better and what you need to change in order to do so.
And like I just like want everyone to know, like, they deserve to be happy. There's no one who like doesn't deserve to like get better. I mean, even someone who thinks that they've just done too many terrible things to deserve to get better doesn't mean that you can't grow as a person and transform yourself. For sure. Nobody is a stagnant being. If we were stagnant beings, like we would never get past the infancy stage. Right. We are constantly growing, we are constantly evolving, we're constantly learning. So like you deserve to like get to the best place you can be, because when you are in that best place, you have the most to offer to yourself and society as a whole. If I want to create the best sets and the best tracks that I cannot be so depressed that I can't get out of bed. Right. That doesn't work that way.
Right. Yeah, for sure. We'll kind of bounce back into a topic that we probably should have touched earlier on, but we'll talk about you in terms of just being a female DJ and how the game has kind of changed since you first got involved, because obviously you're seeing a lot more female artists, big female artists on lineups and things like that. So how has the scene changed in that sense?
The scene's changed just because the more there are, the more comfortable I think females feel about entering it. Because it's kind of like the idea that if you don't see people who are like you doing something, you kind of get the subconscious understanding that you're not able to do it. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie The Runaways with Joan Jett and her like first band that she was in, The Runaways, where when she wanted to learn to play electric guitar, the teacher that she went to told her that women, like girls, don't play electric guitar. And so she basically said like, okay, fuck you, and taught herself. And it was kind of just, she wanted to do something, and she inspired tons of women to become electric guitar musicians. Yeah. And there's so many now that are like amazing. Yeah. I've had women come up to me after a set and just be like, the fact that you're up there just inspired me. And it doesn't mean that they are going to become a DJ, but it inspires them because they see someone doing something that they don't see enough of and they wish there was more of.
Right. For sure.
And I agree with them. I wish there was more female DJs, and there's a lot of things that stand in the way. Well, one of the things that stands in the way for a lot of people about DJing is the money factor. Like, becoming a DJ like does require you to buy equipment. You can borrow equipment, but it's not the same as like having your own guitar and being able to practice on your own time. Right. And DJ equipment is expensive. I mean, I've had to use a credit card to pay for a lot of the stuff that I have, and I've, in some cases I'm still paying things off, and that's a huge factor in terms of what separates people. I mean, if you've ever seen the Netflix series Evolution of Hip Hop, they talk about how like a lot of hip hop and like record scratching came from when the power went out in Brooklyn, and people just like went to all the Radio Shacks and just took whatever they could. Yeah. And then the hip hop scene like appeared because they had access to that equipment. Right. And like not having access to that equipment, like it does segregate people. It's not as diverse because not everybody has the income to be able to afford that stuff. Right. And there's this stand-up comedian who said that for some reason the corporate America is really good at convincing women they should buy shit that they don't need. Like bronzers like $80 at some points, and when you were like, I need that bronzer, but like no, like you probably don't. But like I honestly, like when I started DJing, like I started spending a lot of money on things that like I didn't need, but like I know a lot of my girlfriends really love taking part in it. And I'm not saying that like don't buy fashions, like do what makes you happy, but like if you're going to do something that's really expensive, you have to allocate your funds. So it does separate the fact that like you do have to put a lot of money into DJing in the beginning, and not everybody's comfortable with that. But then on top of that, there's a lot of women just in the technology field who are very rare, and they do get a lot of pushback from, because it is a boys club. There's like, you'll talk to women in the tech field and they'll say like it does feel really awkward being like the only woman in my department. And sometimes there is a lot of misogyny where they just assume that you're not good. I mean, I've experienced it where someone told me, I was like, oh yeah, I'm a DJ. And they're like, oh, that's cute. It was a guy who was like, yeah, that's cute. Yeah, you DJ. That's cute. Yeah. I was like, oh, wow. And then another time I played at an after party that Peekaboo was supposed to play at, but ended up not being able to go. And I brought my equipment so that other DJs could play as well as me. And the people who were setting up my equipment were doing it wrong. And so I was like, I mentioned to them that like, no, you have to do this, this, and this. And they turned to me and they're like, I think we got it. Like they didn't know it was my equipment, and they just assumed that I didn't know what I was talking about. And that was, sometimes I get so surprised in those situations that I can't stand up for myself because I'm just like shocked that they would be rude like that. Right. Yeah. And I feel like I should stand up for myself more, but a lot of the times I just let it go because it's honestly,
should be common sense, right? Yeah. Like at this point, it's 2020 people. Like,
yeah. And there's like so many women gamers who are just like super good, and they still experience harassment. Right. There's a lot of women who are just like brilliant in terms of tech, but there's I'm gonna be honest, like stepping up to a DJ deck and like looking at all these freaking buttons and knobs, and I'm like, what the fuck do I do with this thing? And the fact that there's not a lot of women doing it is a subconscious message for some that, like, you know, it's hard, it's too hard for us. I mean, nobody's saying that, but it does come across in some ways.
Yeah, for sure.
I remember there was a really long lapse where there weren't a lot of female front leaders in rock bands, and then Hayley Williams from Paramore came out, and she just like lit a fire under so many women's asses, and then you started seeing more and more bands pop up. She was inspiring, and if you didn't notice that everyone was dyeing their hair red at that point, like, then you weren't paying attention.
Right,
But you know, things like that. And then like Alice in Wonderland just started coming out with DJ lessons on YouTube, which is amazing, and like I totally support that, because sometimes learning from another female is really great, because if you don't feel comfortable around a male for whatever reason, or you just don't really jive well with, I'm gonna be honest, like, my husband is not the greatest teacher when it comes to DJing. He's very like gruff and like tends to be kind of blunt, and like doesn't really like encourage people as much as he should sometimes. Whereas some women link up better in terms of like, I know what you need, like, to feel confident in this. As a woman myself, I constantly am judging myself. Oh, like, shit, I messed that up. Shit. And it's kind of like this weird thing that's been programmed into my brain that, like, if I am not doing well, then I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna fail, like, you know, as a representation for other women. I can't not be good at this. But that's obviously not true, and it kind of takes rewiring my own brain and like allowing other people to do the same, to allow them the space to be a woman in a male-dominated industry.
Yeah, for sure.
Right now, I see a lot of, and Wednesday, actually, another female DJ and producer said, she said this really well. She said, I see a lot of women either relying on their sexuality or go harder than guys rather than just being entirely themselves. Like, some women like have to rely on think they have to rely on their sexuality to be able to get people at their shows or sell their music, and other ones think that they have to really just be more like forceful and like constantly prove that they're better than all the other guys out there. And like, neither of those things are true. Like, you have the right to just let you as an artist just be who you are. And honestly, I really appreciate the women who will admit that they have doubts about who they are as an artist, but they're still up there doing it anyway. And I created Bass Girl events because I had been on that were attempted all-girl events. And I'm not pointing fingers, and I'm not blaming anyone for the lack of turnout, or that they just didn't really go as well, or that they were organized by male promoters. Like, nobody's fault. I decided to put on Bass Girls because I was finally frustrated enough that, like, you know what, I think I know enough about what is valuable about being a female DJ and what I value in other female DJs to be able to promote it myself. And so I started by using one of the open deck nights at Papa Pete's to do an all-girls event. Like, I booked Carpow, Prim, Solar Spice, and Veronica Eileen, who goes by like Not Your Baby on Instagram, and they all killed it. And there was so many people who turned out. We also did a fundraiser for women and families, which they do a lot of like covered court cases and like sexual assault cases. And they also provide education for workforce. They provide a lot of like access to healthcare for underprivileged families and things like that. They're doing a lot. And so I think that was part of the reason why people showed up, because like the more drinks they bought, like the more money went to the foundation. But also because they were just really psyched that there was a group of girls getting together and, you know, being proud of who they were and performing.
I mean, in today's scene, like, just trying to think of the names to fill a lineup of female DJs, it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy, and the fact that you were able to do that at the local level is very impressive.
Well, and it's like, you know, now that you bring that up, like, you would have to go all over the entire world to be able to do like a 3-day festival of just women. And I don't even think you could do a 3-day festival. I think you could do like 2 at most, and it would only be one stage. Maybe not one stage, but maybe like 2. But it's just like, you'd have to go through the entire world and like really pull from the underground for that to happen. And I'm not saying there's not opportunities for women, because there are, but it's just, we don't have the same dynamic really that male DJs do, because it's kind of like when I started DJing and I learned from other DJs, they were all male DJs. I did not learn from other female DJs because there weren't any other female DJs in my local scene. So I had to be comfortable enough to be in a room full of men, some of them who I didn't know, to be able to learn from them. And luckily I was good enough friends with these guys that I did feel comfortable around them, and they were really supportive and really encouraging. One of the things I struggle with still is like producing, because there aren't a lot of female producers out there, and I get frustrated, and I do feel inadequate sometimes, and sometimes I talk myself out of like sitting down to produce, because I don't know why. It's something that I'm working on. I think I tend to put other priorities in my family life above my artistry, which is another kind of symptom of being a woman, it seems. A lot of women will say I tend to put other people before myself, and I do experience that. I tend to take care of other people before myself, and so that my art does lack because of that. And I'm really trying to catch myself on it. One of the ways I'm overcoming it is like scheduling times to sit down, and even if I like sit there and like don't accomplish anything of significance, at least I did it. It's kind of like, and I used to say this in art school all the time because I managed an art studio, that like creativity is a muscle and you have to work it. Like if you aren't working your creative muscle, like it's not getting stronger, and you're not really gonna get that far. So you have to make the time, you have to show up for the work. Even if nothing comes out of it, you are still using that muscle. You're still getting stronger. Even if you're fucking around in Ableton and making a beat that you'll never use, you're still learning something. You're still getting that experience. And I have to tell myself that that's worth it, and that my artistry is worth it, and like, no, the dishes don't need to be done right now.
Yeah, I can totally see that. A good friend of mine is kind of struggling, but like anything, the hardest thing to do is to get started and dive in, and then once you get into like a flow, then it just becomes more natural, right? But it's just figuring out like, okay, even if I start a track and it's okay if it doesn't get finished, right? Like you said, I think that is a huge thing for people to know, especially coming into it. I mean, not being a DJ myself, but you hear these artists who have all these tracks who don't ever get published, and sometimes they may throw them into their live set, but the guys who've been in the scene a while, I'm sure, have just folders and folders of different sounds that I'm sure they can just pull from.
And it's kind of like, even being a DJ, you have to build up a library. That was really hard, especially coming from someone who didn't listen to EDM music before. Shout out to my husband for that too, because he let me go through his library. And that's like really how I developed my sound, was like pulling from a lot of the stuff that he didn't use anymore.
So who were you attracted to in terms of?
Oh my god, Troy Boy was like, Troy Boy, Keys and Crates, Flostradamus is like earlier stuff. It kind of got like too heavy for me. Just that like really trappy, like hip hoppy vibe I really loved.
R.L. Grime.
Yes.
Who was also
and he was at Breakaway 2 years ago now. That was awesome.
Great show. So what artists have you worked with at the local level? I know you said your husband is a DJ as well. Have you had a show with him?
We get booked on a lot of shows. He goes by Chatterbox, 2 Ds, 2 X's.
Okay.
I'm gonna be honest and say, like, we usually don't like getting booked to play back to back, but people love to book us back to back. It's not that we don't like playing back to back, it's just like we understand that we're 2 separate artists and we play very differently. That being said, we do throw an awesome back-to-back set. When we're like on the same page, it goes really well, because we like meet in a really good sweet spot. We got married at the Kalamazoo State Theater. It was built in, I think it was finished in 1928.
Wow. So
it's like really old, and it's a historic landmark.
Nice.
And I've always wanted to get married there, because we used to have prom there when I was growing up.
Okay.
And it's like, it's gorgeous in there. It's like Venetian, like opera, like gold gilding.
Nice.
And it's just so cool in there. And it's like even got the ceiling has like stars on it, like light stars. And I told him, I was like, like if we're gonna get married, like I honestly want to get married at the State Theater, and we'll just go look at it, see how much it is. But he told me, he goes, just so you know, like if we do this, we're throwing a show there. I was like, I don't know if they're gonna like let us do that. And he goes, I'm still gonna ask. So we like go and look at it, and Chad's like, this is freaking awesome, because it's super awesome venue. And I was like, good, like you like it. And then he goes, so by the way, because we were talking to actually the talent buyer who also manages she'll be the event coordinator if there's other events. He goes, so by the way, how do you think throwing a public show after the wedding would go? And she goes, wait, like, you mean you sell tickets for it? And he's like, yeah. And she goes, I think that'd be freaking awesome. And so he's like, okay, let's do this. So we worked with her, and it took a really long time to find the artist that we wanted. But Pigeonhole and Minnesota were on tour, and so they agreed to stop in Kalamazoo, and that was so awesome because I love Minnesota, but like I'm a huge Pigeonhole fan. And on top of that, they're like the nicest guys I've ever met as far as artists go. Not to say that nobody else is nice, but like they were so like, okay, like tell me about you, like what's going on. And they didn't originally know that we were like had a wedding beforehand. They like found out through Twitter, and then they were like giving shout outs to like, I can't believe Morgan and Chad are married. That's
so badass.
And so what happened is like we had the wedding at, we woke up at like 5 a.m, like got our hair done and everything, and then we had the wedding at 3. We took all the pictures before, did a first look, and then had the reception, and we did it so that like nobody sat down. There was tables to sit down at, but like it was not a seated dinner. It was like we had like food stations, and you could just like go and serve yourself. Sure. And one of the reasons behind that is because there's seats that are bolted to the floor, so like if you really wanted to sit down, you could. Yeah. There was like a few like cocktail tables and then a few tables to sit down, but like the whole idea was like we needed to be able to break it down as fast as possible to set up for the show, because the actual reception is in the theater. Like we had the wedding ceremony on the stage, everyone was in the seats, which was super freaking cool walking down the aisle, because it had just took me back to like my musical theater days of walking down the aisle into a show. And the sound system in there is amazing because it's an amphitheater, so it's just like you actually can't they have a decibel reader, because if the decibels get too high, it will shake the plaster off the walls, because it's so well built that it sounds amazing in there. And I loved being at the State Theater, because not only did we get sound that came with like the package of renting the venue, we also got security with walkie-talkies, even better. So like it was super organized.
Hell yeah.
And we got a day of coordinators so we could like stay on schedule, because everybody had to be out of there at 7:45 so we could set up. All the guests were aware, because we did that wedding website thing, and like I explained everything. We asked the guests, and because we actually gave tickets as like the favor, we gave them discounted tickets. And then
did the grandparents stay?
No. I didn't really expect them to, but like what surprised me is like actually most of my family stayed.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and they were, because they let the balcony be just for family, so they didn't have to like be up against a bunch of sweaty people. Yeah. But like all my cousins were like in the front row. They're like, I love you, Morgan. It was so much fun. But
that's so cool.
They like we asked people like, oh, do you want a ticket, like in the invitation, and some people like said no, which is totally fine, because a lot of people have kids, they have to go home.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Pretty much anyone who was at our wedding would get a discounted ticket. And then so everyone was out there at 7:45. We had to flip the entire thing. Most people like actually went home and changed.
Oh yeah. On the rave gear.
Yeah. Exactly. Like they all showed up and they're like glowing with like they got their sneakers, their glow sneakers on, and their finger gloves. But and then they were just it made me realize for the first time, because my mom and like my brother and like my cousin and my brother's wife had shown up to like my some of my sets at Papa's when they were in town for around Christmas time. But like how super psyched like my entire family was to see me perform was like, it's kind of weird, because I know it's hard to explain EDM to people who don't listen to it and understand it. Like it's something that you can't sing EDM to people, and it's like it's kind of a joke where you have to be like wah 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 when you explain dubstep to people.
Right. No, and the system that you play it on definitely has a factor too, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Different from the car to actual speakers and subs and stuff.
Yeah. So it's hard to explain to people, but everybody was jiving, and I remember playing Kaiwachi, the Demons.
Yes.
But it was the remix, the Liquid Stranger remix. Okay. But, like, my uncle, who's never listened to EDM in his life, he was like, I like that Demons song. Like, and I was like, what? He's like, Demons in my head. I was like, I lost it. But it was like they were all smiling, they were all super happy, and it was just like it like was icing on top of the cake, because what better way to celebrate like two musicians getting married than like have music at their wedding.
Right, for sure.
And so when we played, like I played first, and then we like met up back to back.
Yeah.
And then
did you do this in your wedding dress, or did you change as well?
Everyone asks me that, like, no, that dress was so freaking hot. Like, are you kidding me? I was like backstage and I was like fanning myself with the skirt. Yeah. Plus, like, I couldn't lift my arms any higher than this because it was like that. Yeah. So I changed, and actually, my friend Brennan, who owns Ancient History Designs clothing company, he does really awesome tie-dye. I suggest you check him out on Instagram, Ancient History Designs, or Twitter or Facebook. He tie-dyed a shirt that said bride on it for me. It was like a crop top, and he tie-dyed it for me, and that was really cool. And he also made one for Chad, and our like hashtag was Base Day Ever, like BASS.
Yes,
so like all of our shirts like on the bottom said Base Day Ever.
Nice. Hell yeah. That's
So that
cool.
was fun. And so one of the things that was kind of like the downfall is that we didn't take enough pictures, because everybody was having such a good time. They literally told me, they're like, yeah, we forgot to take pictures.
Yeah.
So like we don't have as many pictures as I think the average wedding does, but honestly, I that's the least important thing to me, because I have like all of those memories, and I would not have asked it to be any other way.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. Like, I was exhausted.
Yeah.
I was absolutely exhausted, and I fell asleep on the couch in the green room at the end of it. And I, like, Chad and I, like, walked to, because we stayed at the Radisson, which was, like, just a block or two away from the State Theater. And, like, I remember us, like slowly walking to the Radisson at, like, 3 a.m. And so and then we showed up to breakfast the next day at 7 or 8. And I think I still had, like, my makeup on and, like, my eyelashes. And everyone's like, oh, my God, like, you didn't even wash your face. From like, no.
Oh man, what an epic day.
Yeah.
I can't imagine this. Very unique for individuals to experience their day like that.
Yeah.
What a cool way to do it.
I want more people to do that. I don't know how many couple DJs there are. Like,
not many, I'm sure.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people have been telling us, like, you need to, like, develop a back-to-back, like, thing but honestly, we're such different musicians and different people, and we respect each other for that it would be hard to, like, constantly have to compromise.
Sure.
Because you just it's different than, like, being your own artist and being able to express yourself, like, to your own desire. Because when you are working with someone, like, you have to complement each other. And sometimes that means that, like, I have to, like, maybe not play the songs that I would play by myself, like, so we're not, like, super strict on BPMs, but I play a lot in 80s and 90s. My, like, weirdest quirk about DJing is I really like playing in 83.7 as a BPM. Don't ask me why. Like, I will adjust songs if I can to that BPM. I don't know why. It's a weird. Yeah. Maybe it's like one of those, what do you call it? Superstitions or something like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think the closest he gets to playing that is 75 and 90 area. Okay. But he's, like, mostly, he plays, like, a lot of deep dubs, so that's, like, 120, 130, at most 140. Whereas I'm kind of all over the place, and when I ask other people, like, okay, what genre do you think I play? And they're like, I don't fucking know. Like, because I technically don't play trap as it's known now. Like, the trap that I play was, like, a very brief stint in the trap history of EDM. It's like we were saying, like, Keys and Crates and, like, Troy Boy. Like, Troy Boy still makes that kind of music, but like, there's not a lot of artists who are making trap that way anymore. Yeah. The ones that are, like, I'm huge fans of, because that's the trap that I know and love. But then I also, like, throw in hip hop, and I do play some deep dub, and I do play some, like, more traditional dubstep, and honestly, it's kind of, like, all over the place enough that most people are just say you play bass music, because, like, it really depends on the night of what I play. But I kind of subscribe to that way of being as an artist, because it's kind of my thinking that, like, if you put yourself into a box, you're only inspired as much as big as that box is. And I had an art teacher in school. He would say all art comes from other art. So, like, your creative nature does not exist solely within you. It exists outside of you, because you're inspired by other art, by nature, by things that happen in your life. So if you limit yourself and based on what you can draw from, then, like, you're not growing as an artist. You're not as inspired as you could be. Whereas, like, if as a DJ you're listening to like all sorts of music, like even classical, or as a producer you're listening to like world music, like from like India, Latin music, like if you're listening to as much as you can, as well as experiencing things outside of your norm, you're going to end up having more tools in your arsenal to define you and inspire you.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like if you're just saying like I'm only a house musician or I'm only a dubstep musician, you're limiting yourself. You could make a new subgenre on EDM just by broadening what you're absorbing.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I'd love to see that kind of. I can understand why some artists choose not to, because you've seen it with Getter when he kind of transitioned into a different sound and had to cancel a tour because his fan base, quote unquote, didn't appreciate it. And so I can see it from that point of view. But, you know,
where it's like that's the thing. It's like you can't have side projects, and I do understand that a certain name like a lot of times is associated with a certain genre. But I'm not necessarily saying that you have to like stray from your genre, but I'm saying that like as long as you're exposing yourself and appreciating like all of these different places that music comes from, you're making like your production skills better.
For sure.
Like Chad will use a lot of like hip hop kind of elements and a lot of dubstep elements when he's producing, whereas like I love classical music, so like if we're working on a track together, I will like demand that he puts a triangle in there, which is like it wouldn't be the first thing that like he would think of. Right. But like, or like strings or something like that. Or like, and you'll notice it, like Sullivan King like has a lot of like rhythm, like not rhythm guitar, but like technical guitar in his songs because of like the metal background. Alice in Wonderland puts so many strings and horns into her stuff because she was an orchestra. And then you have Grizz, who was like in jam bands, and you have that kind of element. But I just think the more you can expose yourself, the stronger you become as a musician and an artist. For sure. That being said, I don't think I could be a confident house musician because I don't know enough about house, and I don't spend enough time like at house shows. I think I could become one if I really wanted to. Unfortunately, it's not something that moves me to play, but I totally enjoy listening to house musicians. It's just not something that moves me to want to perform it as a DJ. And while I won't go towards producing a song in house, I might use like house things that are found in house genre as like elements as to build a track that's more to my style. Or like future bass. Like I've used future bass tracks in my sets, but it's not something that I use heavily. And I do love a lot of future bass songs, but like I'm working on a song right now with Fiends. And I won't give too much away, but like it has a vocal element in it where we're both singing on it, and the obvious way to go towards it would be future bass or house if somebody heard just the vocals. But we're both of us neither are future bass or house DJs, so we're like, well, we want to make something that we're gonna play in our sets that's not gonna be totally like out of the ordinary, like the outlier. Like we want it to be able to flow. So we have to figure out how to reimagine like what people would expect from it. Which is like a fun challenge.
For sure. So where do you see Anzers here in the near future? I mean, obviously there's, in terms of live shows, who knows? But in terms of your overall just producing and DJing, what's going on in the near future here?
I've come to the conclusion, and I've been at this conclusion for like years now, that you can be a really great DJ, but if like you want to like have your own tour and you want to get signed to a record label, you need to produce. Like that's just the facts. There's a lot of amazing DJs who have residencies at clubs, and people come from all over the world to see them, and that's what they're happy doing. But like, as someone who is a musician and loves music and loved being in bands and creating something together, I can't limit myself in just saying like, oh, figuring out Ableton is too hard. Like I sit down and I have to. It is super frustrating. While I'm not a tech whiz, but I'm not like tech unsavvy either. But there are things that I'm just like I can hear in my head, and like I don't know how to make them happen. But there's people who went to school for it. I've thought about going to school for it. I'm out of school now. It would be like another student loan to have to pay, but maybe that will happen, maybe it won't. Right now I'm in the position where all I can do for my music is really just work on producing as much as I can, because that is the next step. And there's this book called Making Beats that is an ethnomusicology study about hip hop.
Okay.
And a lot of the hip hop DJs will say like you need to learn how to DJ first before you can produce. And the only reason they say that is because like when you learn how to DJ, you start to like understand how the whole like genre works. And that doesn't always happen. There's lots of producers who just produce and then become DJs, and that like is fine. But when you're a DJ, like you start to understand like how people respond to music and how they internalize music and how things usually flow. So like something about DJing is like when you use songs with lyrics, you'll notice that when you produce a song with lyrics, they don't actually land on the beat. They actually sometimes are a little bit before, because the way that we speak, you'll take a breath and they'll be a little bit after, or they'll start just a little bit before the beat, and it's like what we're used to hearing as organic, because it's weird, kind of the goal of making an electronic song is to make it sound organic, even though it's completely inorganic. Otherwise you're just like kind of cutting and pasting things in and hoping that they sound good together, but really they don't. You almost want to make it seem like these instruments exist in real life and they're all recorded in a live studio in the same room, just like you would like when the Beatles recorded. And because that is what like makes it sound like music, is that it's more natural. It doesn't, otherwise it kind of just sounds like a bunch of tapes being played one by one that don't really fit together. It has to be more cohesive. And I actually remember tweeting a company like when I was first learning how to produce, like, how do you make all the midis that you used and like, or the samples that you used sound like they were recorded in the same room, if you understand what I'm meaning? He's like, oh, do you mean like as if all different band instruments were recorded in the same studio? And I was like, yeah, because it will have a certain tonality. And then he gave me advice on that, because that was one thing that frustrated me a lot. I was like, I'm getting all these sounds from different places and all these synths from different places, or creating something from a different place, and I have to put them all together and make them sound like they belong together. It's like really weird. It's weird.
No, I totally understand that. Pretty Lights was one of my favorite artists growing up, and that's kind of how he came to be, was taking all these pieces that were never meant to be together and somehow forcing them to be together and make it sound good. He definitely, I think, paved the way for artists to do it in that sense. Vocal wise, do you think you'll do vocals on like majority of your tracks, or are you gonna keep it?
Maybe. The issue is like I really love hip hop and rap. I'm not a rapper though. Like I don't think I should even try, because I just don't have that flow, and there's a lot to rap that I don't understand. Like, okay, so there's a project that actually started in Grand Rapids called Obese Ghost Children, with Nordy as the producer, and then MCF used to go up by MC Friendly. They came together to make like a hip hop project called Obese Ghost Children. They actually just came out with a new album that's really good. But like like MC Friendly or MCF's understanding of like the flow that's needed to rap is just like something that like you can tell like it is a combination of learning and then just like innate talent. And obviously it's something that can be learned. It's just like not something that I super want to learn. I kind of just want to leave it to other people. I don't think I'll sing on all my tracks, because I'm gonna be honest, like my voice is more akin to like a Disney princess than like a really sultry jazz musician. I mean, I can kind of emulate the latter, but I just don't think my voice is useful for everything. I could definitely use like vocal samples, and like for instance, Alice in Wonderland will take certain like sounds that she makes, like she'll just say like or like, you know, and then twist and warp them and layer them. If you've ever listened to her song Okay, after like the bridge part, because she starts the lyrics and then she goes into like the drop, and then there's this bridge part, wanna be okay, and then there's this like climax of her just like screaming, but it doesn't sound like a scream. It's like she's warped it and made it more mechanical, and it's just like you're like, holy shit. And it's just that manipulation of that one sound that like made that entire song for me. So it's not that I won't sing, but I can use vocal samples. It's just that I know that my voice doesn't fit everything, which is why I am so happy as a DJ and a producer to be able to reach out to other people. I have a friend, goes by Switch. The W is actually 2 V's. He's really great at rapping, and like if I want someone to rap on my track, like I'd probably ask him or somebody else that I knew would have to reach out to develop a relationship. Veronica Eileen sings all our tracks, and she has a really like ethereal voice, like very airy. I have a friend who's actually a jazz singer, Jasmine Franklin. She lives in DC. If I wanted like a powerful, like soulful black woman voice, like I'll immediately hit her up.
Yeah.
Because she's just like if I go to heaven and angels sound like her, I'm in the right place.
Oh, wow. That's a compliment.
Yeah. And I have another friend living in California who I was in musical theater with, Annika DeGraff, who also is just like born with a beautiful, beautiful voice. So it's like, so even though I'm not always the right person, like the good thing about EDM is that it's so communal that I can find people who are the right person for what I envision.
For sure. And you started in the folk genre, and then how did that kind of scene differ from the EDM scene?
So other than just the folk punk genre, like you don't, the kind of thing is like you didn't use microphones, amps, or anything. It was very audience participatory, where like everyone sang along and they just like knew the songs so well because like everyone had the CD that it was this energy that was created from being so in love with the message of the music. And we were like in student ghetto basement. So the student ghetto is like the old houses of Kalamazoo that students would occupy while they were in college. You call it the student ghetto because it's really, really cheap housing. Houses are not kept up that great, but when I was in the folk scene / punk scene / hardcore scene, it kind of just meshed in together during that time in high school. There was these college students who developed this group called DIT Kalamazoo. So rather than like DIY, which is do it yourself, they said DIT, which is do it together. So what they would do is they had all these different house venues that would have a basement and like not rent it out, so to speak, but like lend it to DIT to be used as a venue for either touring bands or local bands. So they'd get together and actually develop a schedule of like whose house is going to be used when and for what. Wow. So there was like the Fat Guy House, which actually ended up making a metal festival called Fat Guy Festival in Kalamazoo. Wow. It's 3 days and they have like amazing metal bands there. Yeah. The No Fun House, the Ant Hill. There's a couple others that are escaping me right now, but like some of the best memories I have of like people just being so supportive of their scene and the people in it come from that. That was what really taught me the value of a scene. Because one thing I do get irritated about with EDM is like some people are just like, yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna go. You know, we need you to be there in order for the scene to survive. Right. Otherwise, like a Pandora station would suffice if people wanted background music. Right. But like we need you to buy tickets. We need you to show up. We need you to support for this thing to survive. Like otherwise, it's gonna disappear. And that's what people in the folk punk hardcore scene understood in the student ghetto in Kalamazoo in the mid 2000s was like, this isn't going to be here unless we show up. So it was like, bring your own beer, donate to the touring bands. They'd have just a bucket that goes around and you put in whatever you could. One of the slogans was like, if you can afford beer, you can afford to donate, which is true. Yeah. And it's just like a lot of bands cropped up from that too. And that's the thing is like, the more people participate in the scene, the more of the scene will grow, and the more it will propagate, and the stronger it will become. Yeah, we're only as strong as the people who participate, and that involves fans. Yeah. I mean, otherwise, like, I would just stay in my basement. Right,
and that's why you see promoters like Pascal Rotella, I think is his name, who's like does EDC and all those big ones, and calls the fans the headliners, because really it wouldn't be possible without them, right? Exactly. So he understands, and I know living here in Grand Rapids, you can take it for granted because we've had all these great shows, but it didn't happen overnight, you know. Like, had I been born 10 years earlier, the scene is completely different than what it is now, and that doesn't happen from it just happens one day, right? It's over time. The fact that we had Electric Forest, which then brought people who were around that community to want shows to come to their local venues like the Intersection and 20 Monroe, and it doesn't happen overnight, and you can kind of take it for granted, for sure. And that's something where I think we need to remember, like, this doesn't happen everywhere. I'm super fortunate to live 5 minutes from a venue that pretty much has
it's
a show every week.
Yeah,
or a weekend,
it's a world-renowned venue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for
There's
sure.
like you hear headliners like, I'm not gonna forget this show at the Intersection, because people there really care about their scene.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same like at Papa Pete's in Kalamazoo. Like there are like a hardcore element who really care about the scene, and though it's not as big as the Intersection, unfortunately, they do still show up and they're still like all about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones who allow DJs to become really great.
Yeah.
Just the fact that we have that open decks where anybody can submit and learn what it's like to be in front of an audience makes for a better DJ.
Mm-hmm.
It allows them that experience. It allows them to like experiment and learn from each other. And if you don't have that, like you're just not gonna have DJs that are that good, like because they don't get that real world experience and they don't communicate. They don't like get to meet up with other DJs and learn from them.
Right.
And I honestly am super proud of the majority of DJs in Kalamazoo. Even the ones who are new, like I can see them, how much better they're getting. Like I've watched them progress and I'm really freaking proud of them because that's like our scene and the people who support it, like all the fans and then the other artists and the promoters, they're the ones that are like cultivating that.
Right.
And without them, like, you know, we would just have a bunch of people playing in basements and like may or may not be very good.
Right. It takes a village. It's not just
Yeah.
one person doing it. It's, you know, the bar is saying, you know, I'm allowing this to happen on my property, you know.
Yeah, and on top of that, like Guitar Center, maybe somewhere, but not locally, doesn't have DJ lessons. I kind of wish they did, because like we'd have a lot more. We definitely have a lot more girl DJs.
Yeah.
Like if Bass Girl becomes like something big, I could see it one day becoming some sort of event that women could show up and learn how to DJ or hone like DJ skills from each other and learn to produce with each other in like a workshop atmosphere, which I think would be awesome. I don't think I would be running it at that point. I'd probably hand it off to someone else and just be like a part of it.
Yeah.
You know, you don't go to school and someone's like, here's some decks, like let's learn how to DJ today. Like it's not really seen as like a respected instrument yet.
Yeah. Yep.
And one of the reasons is because like it progresses as fast as the technology progresses, which is way faster than any other instrument. The violin hasn't been updated since the electric violin was created. Like maybe like the electric violin's gotten new features, but I mean it's still essentially the same format. Whereas like Pioneer's planning on releasing CDJ, the next line of CDJs, like maybe not super soon, but like soon enough where I know that some teachers are like, fuck, now I have to learn how to use these things. It allows you to push those creative boundaries. And that's the thing about like tech companies is they're seeing how artists are using their programs, like their audio interface programs and their actual equipment, and they're responding to that and not only making it easier for them to like push those creative limits, but also like create like a new way of mixing and producing music. That's one of the reasons why there's so many subgenres of EDM, and those genres pop up way faster than like any other music scene because they're not reliant on real world instruments. They're reliant on just as many sounds that the artist can make in an audio interface.
Right.
Like when Peekaboo showed up, like that was like a huge moment for deep dub, I think, at least in our local scene, because he did go to Western.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that people didn't like deep dub before he started. He kind of showed up, and he doesn't only do deep dub; he's more like experimental.
Yeah.
But that was a new genre because it wasn't like there 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
It's gained so much popularity in a way shorter span of time than like, you know, ska punk. When ska punk arrived, it took a really long time for it to take off. And there's just so many things that happen so much faster because of technology in the EDM scene.
And I think it's because they're so linked. You know, technology and EDM has always been like
hand
so
in
connected,
hand.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I think that people are more willing to push the envelope and create new sounds. You know, because I mean, when I first got into the scene, dubstep, it all really did kind of sound the same, but they didn't have many tools to get new sounds or figure out new ways to do things. And now it's just like, holy shit, like you said, subgenres and the underground scene in general is just like you hear these songs being played by these bigger producers, you know, and it's awesome to see it. I'm sure as a producer to hear that in and of itself is great, you know, just to be like, wow, this person thinks that this track is good enough to play at a festival or something like that. So that's got to be a really cool thing.
Yeah, and then like on top of that, you have DJs and producers who not only like perform in their own genre that they're usually known for, but they also have love for other genres and can like carry an entire awesome set. Like Carpow is so versatile in her DJ performance. Like, she does trap, she can do dubstep, she does like amazing house set. And so, like, Prim is also the same way. I like, even Kane from Kalamazoo, like, he does rhythm and also really likes house and will do either or, and he has no shame about it, which I know some rhythm DJs are like, I'm never gonna play a house set.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And like me, like, when I play back to back with Chad, I play way more dubstep than I usually do. Because of technology, like, you do have the ability to be more versatile because it gives you more time to experiment. Whereas, like, if I had to learn jazz violin, it would take me a lot longer than me learning how to play house, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, it's a totally different structure and way of playing a violin than old time music.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we hit everything that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything we missed that you want to throw in, or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, Morgan Eakins, thank you so much. This was an absolute pleasure to get to know you. Thank you so much for sharing every detail about your life. This was a lot of fun, so thank you so much for coming on. I hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to look out for tracks on SoundCloud. Is that mainly what you post to?
Yep. Like I said, I'm still really new at producing, so it might be a while. I'm trying to get a new mix-up. Full-time jobs are a real thing, and they do get in the way sometimes.
For sure.
I repost a lot of other local DJs too, and I'm super psyched about them as well. We have a lot of talent in West Michigan.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. We look forward to seeing what you do in the near future here. Hopefully we can get back to live shows, because I'd love to see you perform live.
Yeah, I'd love to have you at a Bass Girl show.
Oh,
That'd
absolutely,
be awesome.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll touch more on that in the near future, because we got something in the works coming on the podcast. So thank you again, and thank you guys for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Perfect.